Your brain wakes you up at 3 a.m., not because something is wrong with you, but because something in your body believes it's protecting you, and that changes the way you should be looking at this completely. Because this doesn't behave like a normal sleep problem. It follows a pattern your brain is repeating on purpose, even if it feels frustrating and impossible to control. And what's strange is, the more exhausted you feel during the day, the more alert your brain becomes at night, almost like your system is reversing what should naturally happen. You expect your body to finally shut down, but your mind begins to accelerate instead. And that contradiction is where most people start to feel stuck. You lie down hoping to finally sleep through the night, but something shifts the moment your head hits the pillow. Your thoughts start racing without warning. Your body doesn't fully relax the way it should, and when you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't fall asleep again no matter how tired you are, as if your brain refuses to shut off for a reason you don't understand. I'm Dr. Sarah, a sleep medicine specialist with a background in psychiatry, and over the years I've worked with thousands of people struggling with sleep, especially men and women over 40 who feel like something suddenly changed, not gradually but almost overnight without a clear explanation. They tell me their sleep used to feel natural and predictable, and now it feels unstable and out of their control, as if their brain is behaving differently at night. They don't just struggle to fall asleep, because many of them actually fall asleep without much difficulty. But then something happens in the middle of the night. They wake up at 3 a.m. with no clear trigger, their brain suddenly goes into overdrive, and their body no longer feels aligned with rest, as if a switch has been flipped inside their system. In that moment, their mind becomes active, not necessarily anxious, but clearly alert. Thoughts begin to move faster and feel harder to stop. Their awareness increases instead of fading back into sleep. And no matter how physically tired they are, they can't fall back asleep the way they expect, almost like their brain is refusing to return to rest. They start questioning what's happening to them, because this pattern doesn't feel normal or random. It repeats itself night after night in a similar way, which makes it harder to ignore or dismiss. And over time, it begins to affect how they feel during the day, creating a cycle that feels both physical and mental, but without a clear cause they can point to. So they begin asking deeper questions. Why can't I stay asleep all night anymore? Why does my brain turn on when I need it to turn off? Why does this happen at the same time almost every night? And why does it feel like I've lost control over my own sleep? These questions start to build frustration and confusion because the answers they find rarely feel complete. And what they eventually discover next is something most people have never been told before, something that explains why this pattern feels so specific, why the brain behaves this way at night, and why it becomes more common after a certain point in life. Because once you understand what's actually happening, you begin to see sleep in a completely different way. Most people believe this is caused by stress, or by overthinking too much before bed, or by habits that somehow got out of control. And that assumption feels logical at first, because those are the explanations we hear most often. So naturally, people try to fix those things first, hoping sleep will return to normal again. And yes, those factors can absolutely play a role, because stress does affect the nervous system, and overthinking can keep the mind active at night, and certain habits can interfere with how the body winds down. But even when those things are improved, something doesn't fully resolve for many people, which is where confusion begins to grow. Because there are people who do everything right. They reduce stress as much as possible. They follow good sleep routines consistently. They avoid stimulation before bed, and they still wake up at the same time every night with the same alert feeling in their brain, which doesn't match what they were told to expect. And when that happens, it creates a disconnect between what should be working and what actually is happening, which leads many people to question themselves. They start wondering if they're missing something obvious, or if their body is simply not responding the way it should. but the pattern continues regardless of their effort, and that's where the real misunderstanding begins. Because if the problem persists despite doing things correctly, then the cause is likely not just behavioral. It suggests something deeper is involved, something that operates automatically beneath awareness, something the brain is doing on its own without needing your permission or conscious input. And that changes how this needs to be approached. And once this internal process begins, it doesn't just happen once and disappear. It can repeat itself in a consistent pattern, night after night at similar times, creating a cycle that feels difficult to interrupt, not because you're doing something wrong, but because something in the brain hasn't been addressed yet. Sleep science now describes this pattern as something far more precise than what most people assume about insomnia, not just a vague disruption or a random night disturbance, but a clearly defined biological response inside the brain, one that follows a predictable internal logic and explains why your sleep feels interrupted in the same way night after night, even when nothing in your external environment seems to justify it. This state is known as the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, and it represents a protective shift in how the brain regulates sleep, not a malfunction, but a controlled adjustment where the brain becomes more cautious during the night cycle, even in the absence of real danger or external threats. And that subtle internal shift begins to reshape your entire sleep experience. In this state, the brain transitions into a form of nighttime alert mode, not intense enough to keep you fully awake from the beginning, but strong enough to interfere with deep restorative sleep. Cortisol patterns begin to lose their natural timing and stability. The nervous system maintains a low-level activation in the background, and the brain delays or fragments the progression into deeper sleep stages, even while your body continues signaling exhaustion. This is why the experience feels so specific and repetitive. You may fall asleep without much difficulty at first, but you don't remain in deep sleep long enough to feel restored. You wake up around the same time almost every night. Your mind becomes active within seconds of waking, and your body refuses to shut down the way it once did, because it is no longer allowing the full sleep cycle to unfold naturally. It also explains why this doesn't fully match what people call insomnia, because the issue is not simply the inability to fall asleep. It is the brain actively interrupting sleep after it has already started, almost like an internal monitoring system that stays partially engaged, keeping you in a lighter, more vigilant state of rest, ready to wake you up quickly if something feels off, even if that signal never becomes consciously clear to you. And this leads to a deeper and more important question, one that changes how this entire situation should be understood. Why would your brain activate this response in the first place? Why would it shift into alert mode at the exact moment you need recovery? What internal signal is it responding to during the night that causes it to hold back deep sleep and keep you semi-aware? And why does this pattern tend to appear so consistently around 3 a.m.? Your brain has one primary job during the night, and that job is not simply to make you sleep, it is to determine whether it is safe enough to fully let go. Because deep sleep requires a complete release of control, and that only happens when the brain feels secure at a biological level, not just physically, but internally across multiple systems, including the nervous system and hormonal signaling. When that sense of safety drops even slightly, even in ways you are not consciously aware of, the brain does not panic or create obvious fear. Instead, it makes a subtle adjustment. It shifts into what can be described as protection mode, a quiet, controlled increase in internal alertness designed to keep you responsive during the night. This is not anxiety in the way most people think about it, and it is not a dramatic stress response. It is something much quieter and more controlled, a background level of alertness that doesn't feel intense, but is strong enough to change how your brain operates, especially during the deeper phases of sleep, where full disengagement would normally occur. In this state, the sleep switch doesn't fully activate. The brain hesitates before allowing deep restorative sleep. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented over time, and the nervous system never fully powers down, remaining partially active in the background, as if it is monitoring something that might require attention, even if no real threat is present. Because of this, the brain stays ready to wake you up, not randomly, but with a certain level of precision, which is why many people notice a pattern. They don't just wake up slowly or drift into awareness. They wake up suddenly and feel instantly alert, as if their brain was already partially awake, waiting for the right moment to bring them back. And this creates a very specific experience. You open your eyes and your mind is already active. Your thoughts begin moving without effort or intention. Your body may still feel tired, but your awareness is sharp, and returning to sleep feels unusually difficult, almost like the system that allows sleep to continue has been temporarily interrupted on purpose. That sensation of interruption is not imagined. It reflects a real shift in how the brain is operating, a shift that prioritizes awareness over restoration, even if only by a small margin that grows over time. And once this pattern begins to repeat, the brain can start anticipating that moment each night, which leads to a deeper question about what is driving it. After 40, this pattern becomes noticeably more common, and for many people, it feels like it appeared out of nowhere, almost as if their sleep changed without warning, even though nothing obvious in their routine has shifted. But this is not because something in the body is failing, and it is not a sign that sleep is permanently broken. It is the result of increased sensitivity in how the body regulates the night. As the body evolves with age, it becomes more responsive to internal fluctuations, especially in systems that control stress and recovery. Cortisol patterns can become more reactive and less stable, circadian rhythms may shift subtly over time, and nighttime hormone signaling becomes more delicate, requiring a more precise balance to maintain deep sleep. These changes are not inherently negative, but they do make the system more responsive, which means the brain begins to pay closer attention at night, monitoring internal signals with greater sensitivity and reacting more quickly to even small imbalances that previously would have gone unnoticed, especially during the transition into deeper sleep stages. This is where the brain becomes more protective, not in an obvious or dramatic way, but through subtle increases in nighttime alertness, where it becomes less willing to fully disengage and more likely to maintain a level of awareness, even while the body is trying to rest, as if it is prioritizing caution over full recovery. Because of this, even small disruptions in cortisol timing or nervous system balance can be enough to activate the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, shifting the brain into that semi-alert nighttime state where deep sleep is delayed or interrupted and the cycle begins to repeat itself automatically without needing a conscious trigger. And that is why many people start to feel like their brains simply won't shut off anymore, like something has changed in how their mind behaves at night. They wake up more easily and stay awake longer. They struggle to stay asleep all night consistently, and no matter how many hours they spend in bed, they still wake up feeling mentally and physically tired. What makes this even more confusing is that the body still feels exhausted and in need of rest, while the brain remains partially alert at the same time, creating a mismatch that feels difficult to explain. And as this pattern continues night after night, it raises an important question about what specific signals are pushing the brain into this protective state repeatedly. Think of your brain like a highly sensitive night security system designed to monitor everything while you sleep, not just what's happening around you, but what's happening inside your body, constantly scanning for signals of imbalance or instability, even when you are completely unaware of it, and adjusting your level of rest based on what it detects. When everything feels stable and safe internally, the system begins to power down gradually. The brain allows deeper stages of sleep to unfold, the nervous system relaxes more completely, and the body shifts into full restoration mode, where repair, recovery, and regulation can happen efficiently without unnecessary interruption during the night. In that state, sleep flows naturally. You move through sleep cycles without disruption, your mind stays quiet and disengaged, and your body reaches the depth of rest it needs. So when you wake up in the morning, you feel a sense of restoration and mental clarity, as if your system completed the process it was designed for. But when something feels slightly off inside the body, even at a level too subtle to consciously notice, the system responds differently. It does not fully power down the way it normally would. Instead, it remains partially active in the background, maintaining a level of awareness during the night as a form of quiet protection. This activation is not loud or obvious. It does not feel like panic or intense anxiety. It is a controlled and measured form of alertness, just enough to prevent full disengagement, just enough to keep you from going completely offline, and just enough to interrupt deeper stages of sleep without fully waking you right away. That is exactly what the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response does. It does not eliminate sleep entirely, and it does not keep you awake from the beginning of the night. Instead, it interferes with the depth and continuity of sleep, creating interruptions that feel sudden and difficult to explain as the brain shifts between rest and alertness without fully committing to either. And once this pattern begins to establish itself, the brain can start repeating it automatically, anticipating that same window of time each night and preparing the system to respond in a similar way, which is why so many people wake up at nearly the same time, feeling the same shift in awareness again and again, raising the question of what is reinforcing that cycle internally. Over time, this pattern begins to create very real consequences, not just during the night, but throughout the entire day. Sleep becomes fragmented without you fully realizing it. Your brain is repeatedly pulled out of deeper sleep stages, and even if you stay in bed for enough hours, the quality of that sleep is no longer the same, which slowly starts to affect how you feel and function. This leads to a specific kind of fatigue, not just physical tiredness, but mental exhaustion, where your thinking feels slower and less clear. Your ability to focus becomes inconsistent, simple tasks start to require more effort than before, and there's a subtle sense of cognitive strain that builds up quietly over time. Mornings begin to feel heavier than they used to. You wake up without that sense of restoration. Your body may have rested, but your brain feels behind. There's a lingering fog that doesn't fully lift, and even after moving through your routine, something still feels slightly off or incomplete, as if the night didn't fully reset your system. As this continues, many people turn inward, trying to find what they might be doing wrong. They start analyzing their habits and behaviors, questioning whether they lack discipline or consistency. And the more they search for answers, the more it feels like the problem is personal, which adds another layer of frustration. They begin telling themselves things like, maybe I'm overthinking too much before bed, maybe I've lost the ability to sleep normally, maybe this is just how it is now. And these thoughts start to reinforce the pattern, creating a sense of helplessness over time, even though the root cause hasn't been addressed. But this was never about discipline or effort, and it was never a failure on your part. Your brain is not broken or malfunctioning. It is responding to internal signals in a specific way, trying to keep you in a state it believes is safer, even if that response is happening at the wrong time. And that raises an important question about what it's responding to. The good news is, this pattern is not permanent or fixed, and it does not mean your sleep is lost, because the brain is constantly adapting and learning, even in ways you don't consciously notice, which means it can also relearn when it is safe to allow deeper and uninterrupted sleep again. This happens because the brain is highly plastic, always responding to internal and external signals, adjusting its behavior based on what it perceives. And when those signals begin to change consistently, the brain starts to update its expectations about the night, gradually reducing the need to stay in that alert state and allowing the sleep process to normalize again. But this does not happen by forcing yourself to sleep or by trying to shut the brain down through effort, because that often creates more resistance internally and can reinforce the feeling of lack of control. Instead, the shift happens when the body receives the right combination of signals during the night, signals that communicate stability and safety to the brain. These signals influence how cortisol behaves overnight, helping to stabilize its natural rhythm while also supporting the nervous system so it can move out of that semi-alert state and return to a more balanced resting condition, where the brain no longer feels the need to stay vigilant and can begin allowing deeper sleep again. At the same time, these signals support the full activation of what can be called the sleep switch, the internal mechanism that allows sleep to deepen naturally without interruption or resistance from the brain. So instead of being held in lighter stages of sleep, the system begins to move more smoothly into the restorative phases that were previously blocked. And when this process starts to shift, the changes are often subtle at first. People begin to notice fewer awakenings during the night. Their mind feels quieter when they do wake up, and falling back asleep becomes easier again. Sleep begins to feel more continuous and less fragmented, almost as if the brain is slowly letting go of control. Those small changes tend to build over time as the brain continues receiving consistent signals, reinforcing the idea that the night is safe again, which leads to a deeper question about what specific inputs are capable of influencing this shift most effectively, and why some approaches seem to support this process while others fail to reach it at all. That's why some people choose to support this process using natural approaches that are aligned with brain biology rather than trying to force sleep in artificial ways, approaches that are designed to work with the system instead of overriding it or suppressing it, and that focus on restoring balance instead of control, especially when guided by principles used in clinical sleep science. These approaches are typically centered around supporting nighttime nervous system regulation, helping the body move out of that semi-alert state, encouraging more stable melatonin signaling patterns, and reducing internal triggers that activate the neural sleep inhibition response during the night, so the brain no longer feels the need to stay partially awake. The goal is not to sedate the brain and not to create dependence on external stimulation, but to provide the conditions the brain requires to naturally allow deeper and uninterrupted sleep, so the sleep switch can activate without resistance and the night can unfold the way it was originally designed to, without repeated interruptions in the same pattern. For those who want to explore this kind of support, there's a simple option available in the pinned comment that follows this same physiological approach, focused on safety, consistency, and alignment with the body, without exaggerated claims or unrealistic expectations, just a structured way to support what the brain already knows how to do when it receives the right signals at the right time. There is no pressure to act immediately, and no need to force a decision right now. This is simply information to help you understand your options so you can decide what feels appropriate for your situation at your own pace and with full awareness, because understanding the mechanism always comes first before choosing how to respond to it. And if you want to go one level deeper into this, there's something even more specific happening that explains why this pattern often repeats so precisely, especially in that early morning window when many people find themselves suddenly awake with their brain already active and alert at almost the exact same time each night. In the next video, I will break down why the brain tends to enter this alert mode between 3 and 3:30 a.m. with surprising consistency, and how cortisol timing plays a direct role in that shift, influencing the neural sleep inhibition response in real time, which begins to explain why your sleep follows this pattern and why it continues repeating itself night after night.